Everybody belongs to lots of different groups, and each one of those tells us something about who we are. We're going to be talking about Bogans, obviously. So if you identify as a Bogan, then that makes up part of your identity. All of the things that you think about yourself, the things you know about yourself, the characteristics, the traits, the attributes you associate with the self, and some of that comes from the groups that we also associate with.
Do I need to define myself as a Bogan first, or do I need to join the Bogan group so that I can define myself as a Bogan?
When we join new groups, one of the first things we have to do is figure out what is the group, right? So what does it mean to be a member of the group? So at first, what we're looking for is who are we as a whole, and then that informs who I am. And then you look for, if you're wearing a Slayer shirt and you see someone else wearing a Slayer shirt, you're sending a signal going, this is what I like. You see that other metalhead or Bogan or whatever, and you go, we share something. You're more like me historically, punks versus the metalhead. Other than Motorhead tended to not agree on any of the band. You know, if you showed up to a metal show with the short punk hair, you might get beat up. You know, if you show up to a punk show with the long metal hair, right? And so there was always that perceived conflict between those groups. You don't go to these shows, you don't go to those shows, to the point where they kind of joined together and went, okay, fine, everybody show up. I just created a little survey, a little online survey, and sent it out to my class. And I just asked, open-ended, so what words or descriptions come to mind when you think of Bogans, regardless of whether or not you believe them to be true. The mullet is associated with Bogan, often long and greasy or unkempt hair, heavy metal t-shirts. There's a cultural stereotype about what Bogans are like. And that's what the students who did this were reporting. They're reporting the societal associations.
And I appreciate your time. I know you're busy. Is it a school? How do you know? You have classes right now, right?
Yeah, we're in teaching term right now.
Okay.
I don't have any lectures on Friday, so
okay,
it's fine.
All right. To start with, maybe just a little background about yourself, so at least people who are listening know who you are.
I'm Matt Crawford. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Psychological Sciences at Victoria University of Wellington. Probably tell from my accent that I'm not a native Kiwi. I grew up in the U.S., specifically Ohio. I did my university degrees in the U.S. and then moved to Great Britain. I worked at the University of Bristol for 5 years before moving here. And I've been here for 18 years. And I and my family are all New Zealand citizens. And yeah.
As we are aware, the topic today is about Bogans. But before we go into the deeper side of Bogans and heavy metals and stuff, right? Maybe we can just define just maybe a brief description about like mental health and identity, just so at least we can have a.
Yeah, no, I mean, in terms of mental health, there are lots of different ways that people talk about it, lots of different ways that people operationalize or measure it. So in a lot of ways, it comes down to measurement. So you might ask people to fill out a survey or a questionnaire, self-reported kind of occurrence of symptoms associated with depression or anxiety or stress. These are kind of three of the most common, and they do tend to kind of co-occur. So people who have depression often also have anxiety. So they are what we refer to as comorbid. So when we're talking about what is kind of good mental health, I suppose to some extent it would be kind of the absence of those things. So, you know, having relatively low symptomology of depression or anxiety, stress. So people who suffer from depression are quite likely to also suffer from anxiety. So if you have one, you likely have the other. So they just kind of co-occur.
Identity, what's that? How does that relate to mental health?
You can conceptualize identity along a dimension from kind of pure individual identity, so who you are, like your personal identity, all the way up through various social identities. So everybody belongs to lots of different groups, and each one of those tells us something about who we are. And so each of those is a social identity. So we're going to be talking about Bogans, obviously. So if you identify as a Bogan, then that makes up part of your identity. So it's kind of like all of the things that you think about yourself, the things you know about yourself, the characteristics, the traits, the attributes you associate with the self. And some of that comes from the groups that we also associate with. So learning about who I am comes partially from learning about who we are.
Is it something that I can choose versus it's deeply rooted to where I came from? Like,
There's a combination. So again, with people belonging to lots of different categories or lots of different groups, to some extent you can choose which one you want to identify with. There are some that are harder to, I don't want to use the word escape, but there are some that are harder to leave, I suppose. So a racial group, especially if it's a visibly apparent racial group, would be one that would be hard to, escape. You talk about examples of kind of light-skinned individual, or in the U.S., light-skinned black individuals who pass, or the idea of passing for white. So if you're light enough, then you can hide that identity. Those kind of categories do provide us some information about who we are, but I tend to think of it more as the ones that we choose to identify as are the ones that are ultimately kind of more important to who we are as people, or how we think about ourselves. It's about, I always say what you need to do is you need to find your people. You always need to find your people. And once you do, that then is more self-defining than, for example, where you came from or your ethnic or religious background, unless, of course, those things are important to you. So again, it varies, right? So some groups we're kind of born into, other groups we choose.
is it something that if I think about people, finding people, does it gravitate? What should come first? Do I need to define myself as a Bogan, as an example? Because assuming I've done some research, this is kind of like me. And then do I need to define myself as a Bogan first, or do I need to join the Bogan group so that I can define myself as a Bogan?
So when we join new groups, it's a great question, first off. But so when we join new groups, one of the first things we have to do is figure out what is the group, right? So what does it mean to be a member of the group? So at first, what we're looking for is, what are the kind of shared beliefs, the shared attitudes, the shared kind of behavioral norms that define the group. And then you look for, okay, now what's my unique position within the group? So who are we as a whole? And then that informs who I am. And then you look for, okay, what role do I fit? So within most groups, you have, subgroups, for example. And so you go, okay, so I'm in this superordinate group, so big group that includes a lot of people, but within that group there are smaller groups, and maybe I'm more like this subgroup than this subgroup. But it's all about first finding out what is the group, right? So what makes this group a group, right? What makes it tick? And what does that mean about who I am? My guess would be that, to some extent, people aren't necessarily identifying as Bogan before they're kind of interacting, with some of that, with some of those groups, with some of those communities. You see that you have a particular kind of shared interest. So I always talk about with metalheads, right? You've got the or punk, you get the shirts, right? So if you're wearing a Guns N' Roses shirt and you see someone else wearing a Guns N' Roses shirt, or if you're wearing a Slayer shirt and you see someone else wearing a Slayer shirt, then you're signaling to each other. I mean, it's all about signaling. You're sending a signal going, this is what I like. And so when you see someone like that, you go, we automatically have a kind of a shared interest, right? You see that other metalhead or Bogan or whatever, and you go, we share something. You're more like me than any just random stranger. And then as you kind of get more involved in those groups and you identify more strongly, you're, again, finding out, what does it mean to be part of this group? You're talking about conflict, right? Now, one of the things that makes kind of identities especially, I guess, dangerous, is when there's conflict, right? So there's the in-group, the group that I belong to, and then there's the out-group. That's the group I don't belong to. And as soon as they're in conflict, whether it's real conflict or just perceived conflict, so sometimes you think, oh, they're getting more than me, which may not be true, but if you perceive that there's a conflict, then the identity becomes really important. And the distinction between us and them becomes, the gap between us and them grows and grows and grows till you get to the point, or you can get to the point that, they end up being kind of dehumanized, right? So look at actual like armed conflicts, historically, or what are currently going on right now. And you will often see evidence of that dehumanization, that they are animals. They don't deserve humane treatment. So that us and them distinction can just kind of spiral down. And I mean, this is where genocides come from, right? No conflict starts at genocide. It starts with us and them, some conflict. It builds, there's more and more conflict. There's more and more anger. There are deaths, more dehumanization, and it just spirals down. So yeah, conflict's an especially interesting kind of aspect of identity. Historically, the punks versus the metalheads, right? They tended, other than Motorhead, to not agree on any of the band. If you showed up to a metal show with the short punk hair, you might get beat up. If you show up to a punk show with the long metal hair, right? And so there was always that kind of perceived conflict between those groups, which I never felt was really a thing. I grew up in like kind of both of those traditions, but I never had long hair.
You mentioned that punk versus metal. I think that was James Hetfield who I remember there's one interview about the thrash metal. That's probably James Hetfield. When they were starting about Metallica, they played show somewhere and with the punk scene, and then they've figured out, or they've realized, punk and metal can go together. That's why the thrash metal.
Yeah, that's ultimately what thrash is. Yes.
That's what oh, okay, that makes sense. But in the olden days, I guess that's the time when there were like clash between identity of punk. Like I am more like into chaos, and then for metal, it's more of like offering of a child to Satan or whatever.
Well, if you think about go before Metallica and the big four of thrash really made much of an impact, and metal versus punk was really at this point early 80s. You're looking at kind of hardcore punk. Some of the New York hardcore bands, obviously Minor Threat is one of the big ones, from DC, and Dead Kennedys, San Francisco, again, all of the kind of more hardcore bands. And the metal bands were the ones that people knew were more things like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Def Leppard. So it wasn't necessarily that combination of hardcore and metal, which is ultimately what thrash was. So thrash and, like I said, Motorhead always kind of got a pass.
Any
Motorhead.
It's like
The punks liked Motorhead, the metalheads liked Motorhead. It was all fine. And it wasn't really until they kind of came together in thrash that it was kind of more acceptable. And you get bands that are those kind of crossover bands like DRI or Suicidal Tendencies, Nuclear Assault, SOD, where they were a little bit more on the punk side of the punk metal combination, whereas Slayer, Megadeth, Metallica were more on the kind of the metal side of that combination. So yeah, you had kind of warring factions of saying, you don't go to these shows, you don't go to those shows, to the point where they kind of joined together and went, okay, fine, everybody show up. And they're no longer in conflict. Whether it's perceived conflict or not. Now, they all still hated prog rock. So they all still hated, Pink Floyd. And
that's interesting. I never knew that, to be honest.
Oh, the punks in particular always hated kind of the prog rock bands like Yes and Pink Floyd. It was more like that 70s prog, because it was like, songs that went on forever and, all the virtuosity of the people who were playing. And punk was like 3 chords, we don't even know what we're doing, short songs. It was the exact opposite of kind of prog stuff. Yeah.
Interesting. Subgroup. You mentioned subgroup. Is that the way we form subculture? Do you think?
Ultimately, yes. So if you think about, if I go as a kind of a superordinate or a higher order group of, say, metalhead. So within metalhead, you're going to have a subgroup that are people who listen to black metal. You have a subgroup who listen to symphonic metal, a subgroup that listen to sludge metal, right? So these are kind of subgroups, but they're all metalheads. So to say, I'm a metalhead, well,
it's like a general thing.
Yeah. Right, that could be anything. That could be, someone who predominantly listens to, nu metal or post-grunge or whatever, but they wouldn't be very similar to me. So, but once you start saying things like, that kind of brutal death metal, bands like Cannibal Corpse, right? So now you're within a specific sub-genre, and the specificity of that group gives you a lot more information about what fans that are in that group, what they're like. And then you go, metal and punk shouldn't be about following rules.
Otherwise, you're no longer like a punk. If you've started following a rule, then punk is about chaos and no rule, right? So
a lot of it, yeah.
So that's interesting. So does that mean, like, when we talk about like reflected towards the Bogans, which I've spoken to about 4 or 5 Bogans now, and a lot of them has specifically mentioned there are different types of Bogans. It's not just I
don't doubt that at all. I mean, I don't have the experience, but I don't doubt that at all.
Yeah. Someone says, like, we have this mainstream Bogan, which is anyone who listens to the rock, which is mainstream. Like, we have those AC/DC Bogans, which is somewhat subcategory of the mainstream.
So they actually go an AC/DC Bogan. Because when I think of Bogan, I think more of hard rock rather than metal. So I think more of AC/DC, Def Leppard, Guns N' Roses, Metallica, because they fit in there a lot. I don't think of, kind of grindcore or, anything like that. And that may be completely wrong because I just don't have the experience. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if they further subdivide. Because remember, like I said, each subdivision says more about who you are. Again, this group is more unique. So the AC/DC Bogan is different from the mainstream Bogan in these ways. And if you identify as an AC/DC bogan, then that is what informs how you think about yourself.
Right. And is it, let's say I'm an AC/DC Bogan, that still doesn't stop me in terms of identity to mingle or to be with other Bogan types, right? I mean,
No, I wouldn't think so. That's again the same idea of subgenres within metalhead, right? So you may think of yourself more as a black metal fan, but that doesn't mean you're still a metalhead, right? You're still part of the metalhead community. And so, you see someone with a, death metal shirt rather than black metal, you still share something. It's still extreme metal, right? So, or it's still metal, period. So there's still an identity there. It's just not as specific, right? So they go down, 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 from the kind of really general metalhead, or in the case of Bogans, kind of Bogan broadly. And, there may be people who get called Bogans who don't identify as Bogans, right? So, you see someone and you go, oh, there's a Bogan. Well, they might, again, not identify like that themselves. But if they're described as a Bogan or they're labeled as a Bogan, then now the beliefs about Bogans are applied to them. So now you make assumptions. Same thing with metalheads, right? So you see someone wearing a metal shirt, you go, oh, they're a metalhead. You make assumptions about what they are like. And people who don't know the community then are relying entirely on stereotypes.
So why is it that some of the Bogans that I've spoken to, some of them are very proud? Oh, I'm a Bogan. Oh yeah, I'm a proud Bogan. Yeah. But some of them they think that it's a derogatory word to a person. Is it a perception?
I would say that's not uncommon. So, there are a lot of negative associations with Bogan. So I mentioned you. I mentioned you. So one of the things I did, that's what I've got notes here for. So I just created a little survey, a little online survey, and sent it out to my class. And so these are all kind of second-year university students here. Most of them probably from the Wellington region, generally. And I just asked, kind of what, open-ended, so what words or descriptions come to mind when you think of Bogans, regardless of whether or not you believe them to be true. All right, so that's an important part. And I mean, my guess is if I asked you to think of what you thought they'd come up with, you'd probably be right. So there are a couple of themes that came up. So appearance, mullets. So the term mullet came up more than pretty much anything else. So the mullet is associated with Bogan. Often long and greasy or unkempt hair, heavy metal t-shirts, tank tops, shorts, tattoos, piercings, snapback hats, baggy clothes, flannel shirts, right? So there was a theme of what does a Bogan look like? And pretty consistent, right? That came up. Another common theme was substance use. So alcohol, specifically beer and bourbon, or bourbon and Coke, I guess is the key thing. Smoking, so tobacco. Drug use, specifically meth and pot, were mentioned. This idea of kind of vehicles, right? So this rev head culture, cars, especially Holdens, trucks, loud, quote, shitbox cars, V8s, motorbikes, kind of burnouts, drag racing. So that's so far we've got what they look like, and then we've got some substance use and they love cars. Social status. So a lot of things were about kind of working class, blue collar, low income, mentions of poverty, being rural or from small towns. Uneducated comes up quite frequently. And then another theme revolves around behavior. Loud was one of the most common, things mentioned. Loud, rowdy, obnoxious, sweary, so they swear a lot. Reckless, antisocial to outsiders, but very social within their groups. As one of the, the men are traditionally masculine, and a couple of, kind of more positive things, because we haven't had any positive things so far. Funny, free-spirited, down-to-earth, non-conformist, those kind of ideas. And then beliefs about what Bogans believe. So suggesting that Bogans are racist, queerphobic, not politically correct, crass, insensitive. So all in all, about 65% of things that people wrote down were negative. Ooh. So about 65%, including terms like white trash, hick, redneck, hillbilly. So terms that imply some sort of moral, hygienic, or behavioral deficiency, right? So it's they're social deviants. About 30% of the items were relatively neutral, but they were coded for class. So things like working class, low income, rural, they're not really necessarily negative things, but they do imply kind of a class-based negativity. And then about 5% of items were mildly positive. So those were the things like kind of funny, free-spirited, down-to-earth, nonconformist. So those were kind of open-ended responses. Just what are the things that come to mind when you think of Bogan? So they're not positive. They're decidedly negative.
Why do you think is that? Like, why do you think, like, probably two questions. First, we stereotype about Bogans. Just that one area of the culture. Second, why is it that the stereotype, people think that it's not positive rather than negative? Not positive.
So why do we stereotype Bogans for the same reason we stereotype anything. We build categories, right? So we make categories of non-social things. You can go to, an inane example like categorizing things as fruit versus vegetable, right? So every time we make a category, we're building it up often from kind of first person experience, sometimes from third person, right? So we just hear about it. And the reason we make these categories is because it makes processing information easier, right? If you have your knowledge about what vegetables are and you see some novel vegetable that's they're now selling and it's in the vegetable section, and you go, okay, that's a vegetable, I know what to expect from it. It should be healthy, it's probably green. I suppose not all vegetables are green, of course, but it gives you the ability to kind of predict what it's going to be like. And we do the same things with social targets, so social categories. So we form stereotypes based on race, religion, age, any grouping. So stereotype of metalheads. That way, you see a metalhead, you have your beliefs about what they might be like. Bogan, it's just another category. So because it's a category that we perceive that is real, so, especially when people identify as Bogan, so they're saying, I am a Bogan, so that means it's a real category, even if it's just kind of socially constructed. We want to understand, what does it mean to be a Bogan, right? So we don't like uncertainty. People don't, a lot of our worst behaviors occur in situations of uncertainty. And having these categories or stereotypes allows us to feel less uncertain. Now, that doesn't mean they're accurate in any sense of the word. And even when they are accurate, they tend to be way overgeneralized. So an example I always use in class when I'm teaching this stuff is, there is truth that men on average have more upper body strength than women. All right, so that's a real existing group difference. That doesn't mean that every man is stronger than every woman, right? It means that there's a group difference, but for the most part, the two distributions completely overlap. So it's, even when something has some truth to it, it gets applied way beyond what that truth would indicate. So let's say that Bogans do, on average, drink more than your average Kiwi. I don't know if that's true or not. No idea. But let's say that they do tend to drink more. It doesn't mean that every single Bogan drinks and or is an alcoholic, right? So we take a real difference that might be quite small and apply it to every single member of the group.
Why is it that I understand about the stereotypes, but why is it that it has leaned towards the negative?
So why does it lean towards the negative? So I think a lot of the negative comments, like I said, imply some sort of moral or behavioral deficiency. So there's something antisocial about it. So the idea of, drinking, drugs, loud music, being obnoxious, right? It goes kind of against the quote unquote social order, right? So we have our social order of how we as Kiwis behave, and these people are behaving outside of that. So when people are outside of the norm, they often get viewed negatively. Now, this is a case where, again, there is some truth, or does seem to be some truth to it being, especially in kind of more rural communities and small towns, and not so much, for example, Wellington Central or Auckland, right? It's not a city thing. And there is an assumption that, out in the country, they're not as educated, they're not as smart. And so now you're saying, okay, now there are these people out there who are behaving in socially unacceptable ways, who also just are kind of dumb, right? And they're low class. And so that's the negativity of it. They're violating the kind of social norms.
Expectation?
Yeah, expectation. I mean, social norms set up an expectation of how you should behave in any given situation. And if you're saying, well, they don't behave the way that I would expect them to behave, or how I would be expected to behave, then there's something wrong with them. A lot of our behavior we do without thinking because it's just what is socially acceptable. It's, every group sets up norms. So these are the appropriate ways of behaving for our group. And again, it varies, so there are national norms, right? So there are Kiwi norms. There are, here in academia, there are academic norms. There are, a group of friends, you have your kind of group level norms. I mean, every group has their ways of behaving. And it seems like the kind of Bogan norms are in opposition to kind of more societal or Kiwi norms. Right. And so I just think that it's just that negativity based on viewing it as somehow kind of morally deviant or morally inferior. Yeah.
Is it possible that maybe in the assumption that, for example, you're a Bogan, and I've experienced a negative experience from you, you're so loud and noisy every morning, you run around here.
Yeah, you've got your Bogan neighbors, sure.
Stuff, and then now you generalize.
Yeah,
every Bogan is now like.
Yep. That's what we do. And so a lot of what people know about Bogans is not from having met any of them, right? There's a cultural stereotype about what Bogans are like, and that's what the students who did this were reporting. They're reporting the societal associations. It doesn't mean that one, they actually believe them to be true, or that they've ever even met a Bogan. But these are what we think as a society Bogans are like. So every society has associations associated with different groups. So within Kiwi society, we have, what are Kiwis like? We have, our associations or stereotypes about what Maori or Pacifica individuals are like. We have stereotypes about what Aucklanders are like. We have stereotypes about what, people from Invercargill are like, right? And we're all aware of most of these stereotypes. So we know what they are. I mean, Bogans obviously know what the stereotypes are of Bogans. And I would venture to guess that most people who live in New Zealand probably also know those same associations or those same stereotypes that we just kind of pick up, right? You don't have to meet any Bogans in order to pick up those associations.
Now, why is it that the Bogans here in New Zealand is being compared with Australia, but another Bogan says no, they are different because Australian Bogans are now comparable to redneck? You mentioned redneck a while ago.
Yeah, that was one of the terms that came up. I don't know the distinction between a New Zealand and an Australian Bogan.
But they said it's more of comparable to redneck. Okay, Australian and redneck.
So they're more like rednecks.
So what's a redneck? Maybe if you're from the U.S., so maybe it's easier.
It's a redneck. All right, so I'm originally from Ohio, which is kind of Midwest, and so there certainly would have been rednecks and hicks around at the time. West Virginia is just next to us, and we would generally view most people from West Virginia to be, hillbillies or rednecks. So a redneck originally was someone who worked outside, right? Someone whose neck would get burnt by the sun because they worked outside. So a farmer would work outside, they would get sunburned. They'd have a red neck, as opposed to someone who was, worked in an office. So you could look at someone's neck and know whether they worked outside or not. And working outside would have been a lower class job. So that was the original meaning of redneck. That's where it comes from. Redneck in the U.S. would generally be working class. So someone working class, someone who does not live in a city. So again, rural, probably manual laborer, higher levels of poverty. So you think of kind of like the Appalachian areas of the U.S., so the Appalachian Mountains, where there's kind of this massive poverty, and most of the people are white, so rednecks tend to be white. Another term, I think, white trash possibly replaced redneck as a term. So yeah, I'm not sure the current distinction. There are certainly, my parents still live in Columbus, and there are certainly places within, about 20 miles or so where you would be kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and it might be referred to as kind of redneck land. So it's not cities. So rednecks don't live in cities generally, and it's kind of a class thing. It's really about class.
In the Bogan book that I've read, Pantera,
right,
they're classified as rednecks because of the way, like in terms of the alcohol they drink. I forgot the alcohol. There's a name.
Jim Beam,
and
Jack Daniels,
Blacktooth Green.
Yeah. Pantera is a good example of a redneck band because they're from Texas. So there's lots of Texas that would be considered redneck. So they're not. I don't think they're from like Dallas or any of the big cities. I'm not sure. But Dimebag and Vinny were,
100%.
They were definite. They would definitely would be rednecks, and they would identify as rednecks. They absolutely were. It was drinking and listening to country music. And,
not metal. Not metal.
Well, they also listened to metal.
Oh, okay.
But they were also big fans of like the the more kind of rebel country. So like Hank Williams Sr., Johnny Cash. So the more kind of rebel country, not pop country. Classic country. No, they were totally into that. And but yeah, lots and lots of drinking. Phil Anselmo comes from New Orleans. Again, another southern city. Yeah, I mean I think they're a great example of a redneck band.
Oh, yeah. So do you think?
Which is funny because now they have Charlie Benante playing drums for them, and he's he's from New York.
Totally different, like subculture, right?
Yeah. No, he's from the you look at a band like Anthrax. I mean, they come from very kind of Italian and Jewish New York backgrounds. So Scott and Danny were both Jewish, and Charlie and Frankie and Joey Belladonna were all Italian. So they come from that very New York background, and now he's playing in the hillbilly band. They're not hillbillies, obviously, but Zakk Wylde is a perfect replacement for Dimebag. Because he's a Southern boy as well, into that kind of Southern rock, that kind of classic rock, Southern rock. He's a very good fit as a redneck guitarist.
Okay. So do you think, as soon as I have identified myself as a Bogan or a metalhead, if they don't want to use the word Bogan, right? What does that do to me in my mental health, or perhaps if I already have this is my identity? What do you think it does for me as a human being in terms of mental health?
Well, the thing is, you start with the question of what do groups provide for individuals, right? So start there, right? And there are different models, different theories of the psychological needs met by groups. I'll describe a particular one that I'm fond of, and you can kind of break down what a group provides for individual members. So being a member of a group should provide something for you. And on one hand, it provides connection, right? So it provides connectedness, right? So acceptance, warmth, caring, understanding, right? So these are people who accept you. So it's acceptance. And it's a cliche to say we are a social species. We are a social animal, right? We need other people. And one way that we get that is by our groups, right? Especially groups that you choose. Again, finding your people. So there's that kind of connection, which is all good. There's, groups help us to achieve things that we couldn't do on our own. I don't always want to go back, evolutionarily speaking, but you go back to those hunter-gatherer societies, and, being in a group meant that you could do things that an individual could not manage. So, hunting a mammoth, one person's not going to bring it down, right? You have a group of 10 or however many, and then the group can do that, but an individual can't. It allows you to kind of specialize and say, okay, I'll do this, you do that. So there's a certain reciprocity. And so the idea of that is, if I help you with something, then you feel like there's, you should do something for me, right? This is one of the basic norms underlying the history of humanity, right? This idea of you help others and then they help you back, right? This is how society is developed, right? And so groups allow us to do that. So we're in a group together, and let's stick with hunter-gatherer, right? And I say, okay, well, my hunting group was successful, your hunting group wasn't. We'll give you some meat, because someday down the road, your group will be successful and mine won't. And then you will give me meat, or you will give us meat, and then it's good for all of us, right? That's how society is built.
Is it how our brains are wired as well, in terms of?
We are evolutionarily programmed to towards reciprocity. So think about when someone gives you something, you almost automatically feel like you have some sort of an obligation to return the favor in kind, right? And this is because it's been part of our evolution all along. It's part of who we are as a social species, right? And so groups allow that to happen effectively and efficiently. So if you had to rely on society as a whole to help you, you're probably going to be waiting. Versus your group, your village, your family. I mean, a family is a group. So that the smaller the group, the greater that kind of reciprocity, because it's necessary, right? There are fewer people who can contribute. So everybody gives what they can. So that's kind of that. We've got the kind of connection, then we've got kind of achievement. And then, as we've already been talking about, identity. Right, so groups provide us a sense of identity. So who I am is partially determined by who we are, right? So what are metalheads like? Okay, well then that tells me something about what I am like, because I am like you, or I am like other group members. There's a phenomenon in the literature called self-stereotyping, and the idea of that is, if you identify as a member of a group, what you tend to do is view yourself as being kind of like a prototypic member of the group. So me, if I say, okay, I'm a metalhead, then that means that I think of myself as being kind of the prototype of metalhead. What does that mean? What are metalheads like? That's what I'm like. Yeah. Right. So you take on those qualities in your self-perception. And to some extent, you also take on the evaluation. So this is where it gets really interesting, because you're asking, well, what, with the stereotype being quite so negative of bogans, or metalheads for that matter, what does that mean? In terms of health. So we do gain a certain portion of our self-evaluation or our self-esteem from the groups that we belong to. And the way we determine that is by comparing our group with other groups. So to the extent that my group is positively viewed, or is in some way better than some other group, then I feel good. If my group is negatively viewed, and some other group is better than my group, then I feel bad. So that's kind of just classic social identity theory. So that would predict anyone who was a member of a negatively viewed group would necessarily have low self-esteem, but that's not the case. Because there are all kinds of mechanisms we use to kind of get rid of that negativity. And so you're asking, what are the impact on mental health? So to the extent that a group can fulfill those three types of needs, so that kind of, that a group provides kind of meaning to our lives, support, a sense of agency and identity, it improves mental health outcomes. Right. And one of the ways it does this is through what's referred to as social capital. So the idea of social capital, it's, I think, probably less a psychological term and more of a sociological term. But the idea is that our social capital, or your social capital, my social capital, represents kind of my relationships in the world, and some of those will be the groups I belong to, that can provide ways for me to kind of achieve my goals. And so things like a sense of community, that's incredibly important. So having a sense of community is positively related to psychological well-being. As I mentioned before we were recording, I think, that my wife went to the thrash show with me. She usually doesn't go to the metal shows with me. She goes to the punk shows, but not the metal shows. and it was Sepultura and Death Angel. And Death Angel's singer, between songs, did some talking. And when we left, she said, I wasn't really expecting that. It was really about kind of togetherness and community, and everyone was there with kind of a shared sense of identity, right? It was we're thrash fans or metalheads or whatever. And I said, yeah, that's what metal has always been, to me at least, right? So both metal or punk has always been, if not explicitly about community, at least partially, right? There's always that, it's us, we're together. And many times it's us against them, right? It's us against the world. It's us against society. So there is that community. And
I asked this question to Bogans, like, can you unbogan yourself? That's a term. Like, I don't know if even that exists.
Unbogan.
Yeah. And they are like, probably, but why would you do that?
Yeah.
Is it true?
The
Is it
idea,
possible? Like,
of course it's possible. So, I mentioned earlier on, there are some groups that are easier to leave. So another way of putting it is there are some group boundaries that are more permeable. You can, you can't necessarily leave a racial group or age or
that's
whatever.
like given. Okay.
But Bogan would be something that, in theory, if you went, okay, I don't want to be a Bogan, you could stop. Unless what they're saying is, no, a Bogan is who I am. But if you're saying, well, Bogan is who I am and I'm proud to be Bogan, then, well, you have no reason to want to leave.
Those are two different, like Bogan, I am a Bogan versus I am a proud.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, you mentioned before, you said, there were some people who were like, really, really proud to be Bogan. And that's, that idea of kind of in-group pride of, this is who we are, be proud of who you are. So, look back to, a lot of my examples are like kind of American civil rights kind of things, where, you get like James Brown, the kind of funk and soul, introduced the idea of kind of, say it loud, I'm black and proud, right? It was take pride in your blackness, right? Take those things that the majority white society has said are negative and say, no, this is who we are. Black is beautiful. Black hair is beautiful. Black skin is beautiful. It's anytime you start talking about things like pride, and I know the term pride now generally gets thought of as within the rainbow community. And one of the reasons for that is if the majority says you are bad, then one of the ways to kind of fight back against that is through pride. No, we're not. So again, with pride parades and stuff, they're basically saying, no, this is who we are and we're proud of it. And we should be. We absolutely should feel proud of being who we are. So any oppressed group or derogated group or negatively viewed group, that is one of the tools kind of in your toolbox for kind of dealing with that negativity. You go, no, I'm a Bogan and I'm proud of it. Or, you see it with within the class system, the idea of, I'm working class, but I'm like, proud working class. At least I work for a living, right? And so you see that, people go, your group isn't good. And you go, I'm proud to be a member of my group.
Do you think that for those who are not like for those who think or thinks that Bogan is a derogatory word, do you think is it because they were slapped on that label first before self-identifying as a Bogan? Like
I think that's probably a good prediction. I mean, that's a good assumption. I would venture to guess that that's probably true for any number of people who, again, so maybe you don't identify as a Bogan, but you know, you're a fan of, you know, the hard rock, whatever, and maybe you got long hair, and so people go like, oh, you know, you're just a Bogan, right? And so it's, you know, maybe you grow into that, right? So you go like, oh, maybe I am a Bogan. So I'm gonna hang out with some Bogans and go, yeah, I like these people. These are my people. And then you go, I am one, right? So it could start out in that way. You know, others might just, you know, kind of see Bogans and go, yeah, that feels right. That these seem like my people. And then you kind of put your foot in, get the information, find out what it means to be a Bogan, and then you go, yeah, this is me.
And I remember another Bogan says like she was told that she looks like Marilyn Manson, and because of that, she refused to listen to Marilyn Manson just
Right.
because of that instance. So I feel like that's
A Bogan that looks like Marilyn Manson. See, I figure if you look like Marilyn Manson, someone would say that you were a goth.
yeah, and she doesn't want to be labeled as goth because she's a metalhead,
Yeah.
something like that. So
Well, it's okay not to listen to Marilyn Manson because he is a bit of a creep.
wow,
More than a bit of a creep.
okay,
Yeah, you know, there's the whole you know, separating the artist from the art, but
it's still.
he's a creep.
So what in terms of, it's not like we want to change the perspective of society with metalheads and Bogans, but what do you think?
Well, it would be hard to do that.
Is it?
I mean, changing stereotypes is incredibly difficult, right?
Even if like you can interview 100% Bogans in New Zealand just to prove that they're all not the same or equally bad.
Yeah, it's still hard because, I mean, one of the key ways to kind of get rid of these kind of negative views, right? So, or prejudice, better term for it, or is a term we would use, is through experience, right? So you get to know, you've been meeting Bogans and talking to them. And I think in one of your emails to me, you said, you know, your experience has been that they seem quite friendly and happy and, you know, and you know, easygoing. And so you've had those experiences. So your view of what they are like is now colored or corrected from society's view because you've had those experiences. And so the actual direct contact, so having contact with those, you know, those group members, and that's for any group, right? So a lot of, going back to the American Civil Rights kind of thing, the idea of desegregating schools, so that it wasn't that there were black kids in black schools and white kids in white schools, but kind of putting the kids together so they could meet and interact and go, oh, okay, they're not, they're like me, right? You know, so it's really that kind of impact that is hard to make happen though, right? So, I mean, we have negative stereotypes about all kinds of groups, and, you know, you could try to get rid of any of them, right? So think of any negative association. They're really hard to overwrite. And a lot of it is because our biases can occur even when we're not aware of them. So the term implicit bias gets used a lot. So people talk about, you know, like implicit bias training or whatever. And it's, I mean, really what it represents is there's some negative association. So Bogan, bad. And, you know, whether you believe that or not, if that association comes to mind and you see someone who you think, oh, that's a Bogan, you'll think negatively about them. You might not intend to. And in all likelihood, you maybe don't intend to, but you might not be aware of it.
Right.
So that's the point of implicit bias. So how do you overwrite that is really the question, because it's incredibly difficult. Yeah. And I'm not sure how you would go about that, because ultimately, even if you go, okay, I've met these Bogans and they seem nice enough, and whatever, those associations of kind of like gearhead, alcoholic, dirty, still going to be there, and they're still, it's really easy to meet one person or meet one Bogan and say, okay, but they're not like the rest of them. I met this guy, he was really nice, he doesn't drink at all, he's well educated, he's happy, he's nice, he's friendly, whatever, but you go, but he's not like the rest of them. See, we do that all the time. It's how people who are kind of racist can say, yeah, but I have a black friend, right? Because that black friend basically just isn't viewed as being black, right? You go like, oh, I have that friend and he's not like the rest of them. So real hard to overwrite these kind of things.
Is it deeper than subconscious?
Well, I mean, it is, yeah, it's kind of below that. Yeah, subconscious is the term you could use, or unconscious. Yeah,
Unconscious.
Yeah. You say it's napalm death or death, right, for Schuldiner, and you go, well, I'll just avoid them, and you'll never find out that they're nice guys. That, again, pacifist, humanist, vegan, you would never know.
Or someone who likes stuffed toys.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's that those associations lead you away from discovering how you might be wrong.
Is it possible to have a disconnected identity with what you are doing? I don't know if that makes sense. Like, yeah, I look like a metalhead, but I don't listen to metal.
That would be weird. Although I did, there was a student in one of my classes a couple of years ago, well, maybe it was last year, not important, and she was wearing a Slayer hoodie. And I mentioned something about Kerry King's new album, which is very Slayer-like.
Very Slayer-like, yeah.
It is. I mean, because Kerry King, obviously he has his style of writing music, so it's going to sound like him. And she looked at me funny, and I said, "Oh, you were wearing a Slayer hoodie like yesterday," and she was like, "Oh, that's not mine."
Oh, okay.
It was like her boyfriend's hoodie. And I was like, oh, okay. So I made an assumption, right? She has a Slayer hoodie, and I go, oh, have you heard the new Kerry King album? Right? So assuming that someone who likes Slayer would probably also like this album, but she only looked like a metalhead because of what she was wearing, but wasn't one.
Apart from celebrities wearing metal shirts.
Yeah, there is that. I've seen some examples of that with like, Kardashians or whatever, wearing metal shirts as kind of a fashion rather than a fanship. Yeah, no, I'm not in favor of that. Obviously, those people do not identify as a metalhead. It's a costume.
Costume, right. I think that's where the question, like, name 3 songs came out.
Yeah, that always annoys me, and I look forward to the day that someone questions me on any of the T-shirts that I wear, because I will bury them with information. So, like a band like Opeth, I really like Opeth, and I've listened to but I don't know that I could name you, 3 or 4 song titles, because I don't listen to it the same way as some other stuff, right? So growing up with CDs and tapes, I mean, you've got, the physical thing. I've got like 103,000 like digital tracks in my play database or whatever. I can't remember all of that. But back when there just weren't very many, yeah, you knew all that stuff. You knew it inside and out. You knew who, every member of the band. You knew all the song titles. You knew, yeah, inside and out.
So thinking about Bogas, what do you think people, or what do you wish as a metalhead, probably, so that you can relate rather than saying Bogans? What do you think people should understand about metalheads?
Well, it's one of these things where you go, okay, well, what should people understand? I mean,
Is that
as
like
with-
advice but not advice?
yeah. There's actually quite a lot of research. I think you said you talked to someone who previously who has done like heavy metal research or whatever. Yeah.
and book.
There's actually a journal. It's the Journal of Heavy Metal Studies, I think is called. It's a British journal. And I think what a lot of people think is the case is pretty much demonstrated just not to be true. You think that, people believe that metalheads are angry, antisocial, maladjusted, depressed, drug addicts. And the research just doesn't bear it out. There was a paper that came out, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And it was picked up in various newspapers. And I don't know how many people sent it to me, because it was basically a paper saying that heavy metal makes metalheads less angry, not more angry. Right? So, and what they had done in the study was they had made people angry, and then had them listen to either metal music of their choosing or nothing. And the metalheads who listened to metal, their physiological, kind of arousal from being angry came down faster. They reported being less angry. It's that idea that we often listen to music to regulate our emotions, right? So you could listen to something like Slayer, Rain and Blood, and go, this is the most angry, aggressive thing I've ever heard. I can listen to it while cooking dinner and it makes me happy. It's a great album, right? It's not, it's that what you think is the case because, it sounds angry, it sounds evil, it sounds aggressive and violent. But that doesn't mean it produces that in the people who like it.
Right.
Right. Now, if I did a study where I had people who were metalheads and people who weren't metalheads and made everybody angry and then played metal, well, the people who don't like metal, who were made angry, listening to the metal would not make them feel better. Right? It's about the metal makes metalheads feel better because they like it. It's comforting. It's comfortable. It's familiar. But if you don't like it, it's just going to make you angrier and angrier.
So do you think that would the result of that study would be the same if, in the assumption that I like pop and you made me angry, now I listen to pop that I like?
Yeah, it should do the same thing, right? So it's about what does the music, what does it do for you when you're listening to it? And like I said, we often use music to regulate our mood. If you're feeling really sad, maybe you're more likely to listen to a band like The Cure, right? If you're angry, maybe you listen to something especially aggressive and it just kind of, pumps you up and it just kind of makes you feel better, right? So if you're angry or if you're happy or if you're afraid or anything, it's all about physiological arousal. So if you are angry, your body goes, ugh, right? Your heart rate increases, your breathing increases, all kinds of physiological changes are going on. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are angry. The same changes to your body happen when you're happy or scared. So now your body's going, I'm all amped up. And then you listen to something you like. Now, instead of interpreting that kind of physiological arousal as anger, it's joy, happiness, right? Because it's attributed to the music rather than whatever it was that made you angry in the first place, right? So it is, it's a way to regulate emotion. and go to any metal show. Like I said, the pit looks incredibly violent from outside, just like the music sounds incredibly violent. But, you know, any number of times I've been in the pit, if, you know, you go to fall down, you don't hit the ground. Someone catches you, someone picks you up before you hit the ground. It's not, no one's there. Well, most people are not there to hurt other people. When the meatheads get involved, you know, the jocks get in, see, that's another group. When the jocks get involved, it can become violent. But, you know, like the true kind of metalhead, the true kind of, you know, punk metalhead, thrash, crossover kind of thing, that just wasn't the case. It's not about violence. And that's hard to communicate without experiencing it. Like I said, with my wife at the show, she was like, I wouldn't have expected that from, like, you know, thrash metal, right? So kind of, it's just not what you expect.
Okay. Oh,
Anyway, we're always off topic, but
yeah, that's
anyway.
okay. That's okay. I think I've asked most of the things that I should ask.
Yeah. Now, I think in terms of summing up, or then, you know, I mean, I think that the research is pretty clear. Regardless of what the identity is, you know, having a strong identity, a social identity, you know, in a group that provides those kind of important psychological needs is associated with more positive well-being. So lower, you know, evidence of, you know, symptoms of depression, anxiety, stress, being better able to handle stress, and ultimately the better psychological well-being results in better physical well-being. Now, I will say that there are some groups that, you know, some of the behaviors they engage in are then counterproductive to physical well-being. So excessive alcohol, smoking, drugs. So yeah, there is that. But those other things being equal, yeah, being part of a community, identifying with a group of people who accept you, who like you, who provide, you know, a sense of agency, a sense of belonging, a sense of identity, is incredibly beneficial. So even, you know, even a group who other people might view negatively, and who they know other people view them negatively, they're still a community.
Right.
It's still us. It's still my people. And that, you know, that kind of that social network keeps us from being isolated. It keeps us from being lonely. And isolation and loneliness are not good for your mental health. So, yeah. There's nothing especially bad about Bogans. They're another group that can provide meaning for people who identify as Bogan. That's...
Okay. Thank you for your help. I appreciate it. I know you're super busy, and yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.